We've just a week to go now before we're live on stage with the new show, Cocaine Cowboys. Final tickets on sale from mcd.ie, our venues. So tell me about the book that you're reading.
I'm reading a book called Smoke and Ashes, A Hidden History of Opium, basically it's actually by a novelist called Amitav Ghosh, who I never read any of his novels.
Where'd you come across this?
It came in free to the office, believe it or not, and it sat there for a number of months.
Yeah.
And I've one of our colleagues, Robbie Farrell, suggested it to me. That looks boring enough for you to read,
right?
Basically,
no, I'd say that's interesting.
It is interesting, because it's obviously it's the history of opium, really, in China and India as well. Haven't finished it yet, but that's really where it's focused. But I suppose in a broader sense, it shows it's not just about the drug itself being an underground thing that people became addicted to, but it's how the great powers, I mean, certainly the British Empire, fought wars to be allowed to sell opium in these countries, and just how it was used as a political pawn, I suppose, and how politics interacted with it. And although that's kind of it sounds like, well, that's all history and colonialism, and the British fought the opium wars to be allowed pump opium into China. They actually went to war to be allowed to do it. But you still see, obviously in Colombia, the Americans interceding there. World politics plays a role in Colombia and the destruction of coca plants. And obviously in the heroin market, politics has played a huge role, because in Afghanistan produces nearly all the opium, I think, or all the poppy plants that are ultimately become heroin.
It's the biggest producer of heroin.
And politics has played a constant role, because at times the Taliban have used it to fundraise. The Americans have tried to destroy it. There've also been a lot more murky parts to it. But
and up to date, the Taliban have banned the production of it.
Yes.
And it seems from plant to product takes 12 to 18 months. So that hasn't yet been properly seen yet, whether or not they are going to cause a problem with supply of heroin on the streets. And obviously that brings us up to date to why we're discussing the threat of fentanyl here in Ireland, which is the synthetic version essentially of it.
Well, I mean, look, it's definitely, they seem to be saying it's going to have an effect. The Taliban, after sort of turning a blind eye to it for many years and allowing the heroin trade to be a source of fundraising, after they sort of retook the country, they seem to have taken a different stance and stamped it out. As you said, it takes, like any product on the market.
Yeah, it takes a while
It takes a while, but we're seeing now over the last, probably since September, October, in Dublin in particular, we're seeing a drug called nitrazine, which is a heroin substitute. It's not fentanyl, but it's something like it. And that has all of a sudden, even it's appeared on the streets of Dublin, and it's causing this major fear of overdoses. Just last week, I think it was, the HSE put out another warning.
You see them on the streets on the way in, on the roads on the way into Dublin, flashing up on the road traffic signs.
Yeah.
These warnings. Saw them myself there last year.
Yeah.
I was actually coming into town one day, and it was the really bad. Do you remember there was a weekend that there was about 90 overdoses or something?
Yeah, I think it was actually, it was 57 non-fatal.
Yeah. But I actually was coming in to town, and I saw, first of all, the signs, and then I saw somebody being taken by ambulance who had overdosed. Yeah. Really, really strong. And that's the problem with it. It's the strength of it. So they say fentanyl, even a tiny, speck of it, can be lethal. Yeah. It is more than or up to 100 times more potent than heroin. Yeah. In a very small amount. It's caused a huge problem in the US, which are slightly different to us because they were coming from an opioid addicted population anyway. Yeah. They had been for a long time prescribing OxyContin and other drugs for pain relief, oversubscribing it. The huge big scandal with all that. We might go into it someday, but we'd go off topic too much. But that seems to have left people open to buying it on the streets, this fentanyl. It's coming into the entire drug system They're cutting cocaine with it as well because it's making it stronger. And they are looking at 100,000 people dying a year. They say 1 every 3 hours overdoses in New York on fentanyl. So serious is the crisis that Joe Biden has even been speaking about, measures they're putting in place across the states. In California, for example, they have test strips that they're handing out free for drug users to be able to see if there's any fentanyl in whatever street drugs they're buying. It's Europe has been kind of waiting for it. Yeah. It feels as if it knows it's coming, and it's just a question of when. And of course, we've spoken about the Taliban, the production of it, etc. But the fact of the matter is fentanyl is produced in a factory. Yeah. So you're cutting out the idea that you have to deal with the Afghani suppliers, that you have to transport this illegal substance across borders and all the ways that it has to be got to market as such. So fentanyl is like the clear route for drug dealers.
It's the clear route, and obviously nitrazine is just another, like, we don't probably understand the chemical makeup of these things, but it's just the same. It's another synthetic product that replaces heroin. Like in the US, of course, what happened is, like, the fentanyl crisis has caused such destruction that they say it's actually brought down the mortality rate of the country as a whole. So people are dying, like, it's actually brought it down. I mean, it's also
brought it up.
Well, it's brought it, so people are dying at a younger, like, the average age of people are dying in the States is getting younger.
And because it's the top killer of 18 to 25-year-olds.
Exactly. Now. So, I mean, that's actually brought the whole country's mortality rate down. And of course, in developed countries, as we're called, over generations, the mortality rate has gone up. People in Ireland, I can't remember exactly, but it's something in their early 80s, people are dying. But in America, it's actually coming down, not solely for fentanyl, but fentanyl is playing a role. So it's that sort of impact. If you compare, obviously, to other conditions, it's right up there alongside certain types of cancer and all of that. Obviously, the Mexican cartels diversified into fentanyl, and because they had those supply routes, they were able to get it into America really quickly and easily, and quite cheaply as well. Those routes haven't automatically existed in Europe, but we heard Seamus Boland in a couple of interviews last year, towards the end of the year, saying that Irish criminal gangs were actually brought over to South America to discuss bringing fentanyl into Ireland. They were brought over as part of a European sort of conference, I suppose, to discuss bringing that in. Like, obviously, the heroin trade has become a smaller part of the overall drugs business in Ireland and across Europe, and there was obviously a major seizure in Ireland last year. There's people before the courts, not to get into it, but I think that was the biggest one-off seizure in Europe that year. So there's still a lot of money to be made selling heroin. If the heroin isn't available, those synthetic drugs are going to be brought in by the criminal gangs. I mean, there's no doubt about it.
But I think with fentanyl, the risk is, and Europol have spoken about this, obviously, if they want to test the market, and the market has been tested here before, in 2016, there was a series of overdoses, and it was pure fentanyl that was found at that point. Yeah. It had made its way into the street heroin supplies. And I think there were 6 overdoses, non-fatal. But so that sort of thing is what they would call testing the market. Yeah. Seeing what, the market, unfortunately, is usually poly drug users. Yeah. We're buying anything and will take anything and aren't really actively watching their health, which is the problem. Obviously in the States, a lot of young people, a lot of superstars, a lot of really, famous people have also died from taking this. But the Europol line on it is, and their worry is, that they have identified Mexican cartels basing themselves now in Europe, like not just having salesmen, but basing themselves in Europe. And they are known as the cooks. They know how to make it. Yeah. So some of the components of fentanyl come from China, but you can ultimately make it within Europe. It doesn't need to be shipped from America, South America or Central America. It can be made within Europe, and they are sort of supposed to be offering these services of teaching people how to cook it and maybe operating EU-based production sites, which is cutting out the big risk of trying to enter it through the ports of Europe. Yeah. And from Europe, then obviously you have most of Europe is accessed by by road network. And all of that sort of stuff is what's worrying. I think the police, obviously, they will have to deal with the fallout from it, but also health officials.
Yeah, I mean, the big risk, I think, with fentanyl is that it's obviously a dangerous drug in of itself, but what happens is that people are mixing it with other substances that are there. So they may have a bit of heroin, they'll throw in a bit of fentanyl to make it more potent, and they'll mix it in with other, even just ordinary mixing substances. But there's no, obviously, quality control there. And so it can lead very easily to accidental overdoses because the drug is so potent. If too much of it is put in, you don't have, obviously people checking these things in a way that you would with an ordinary product. And in the US, a lot of people have accidentally overdosed because of that mixing process. And obviously that's what's happening with the nitrazine in Ireland as well, that people are getting a €20, €30 bag. It could look the proper size, but you really don't know what the composition is, and that has led to these non-fatal overdoses. And people have been very lucky, and you have to say the HSE have done a good job with the alert system. That information does seem to have got around, and you can see the incredible value of a more progressive approach to putting out those warnings. But that is the big danger. Fentanyl became one of the big earners for the Mexican cartels in recent years. They were able, as you said, what they call the precursor to fentanyl were being made in China by probably in many cases by like legitimate companies, if you want. They would produce a part of what is used to make fentanyl, and then it was being put together and made by the Mexican cartels themselves and just smuggled over the border. So that seems to, as you said, because rather than ship it across the Atlantic, which probably slowed it down. Europol put out a report last year noting the kind of the decline in the heroin trade, but really flagging this up as, if not an inevitability, an absolute huge risk that this was going to hit our shores. And we've seen it again and again. I mean, if you look at, say, crack cocaine or even cocaine itself, there was a lag from when it hit the US to when it came to Europe, but it did come inevitably.
I mean, areas of Dublin are currently experiencing a crack cocaine epidemic. We're not even really talking about it too much, but the fact is that they are. Close to home in the UK, the NHS has issued warnings, and they have noted spikes in the fentanyl deaths in 2019 and in 2023.
Yeah.
And obviously, we're next stop.
We are.
The UK, there is, from the transport network of drugs coming directly from Europe, it is left off usually in the UK and then transported on to Ireland, which is another kind of sign of the risk that we're facing. I think the Justice Minister herself, Helen McEntee, and along with Seamus Boland, warned about the risks of it. It is actually a legitimate drug.
Yeah.
It's a painkiller that's used in hospitals.
Yeah.
And it's mainly used to treat patients in late stages of cancer, and if they've had operations, it's a kind of a morphine.
It's so, and just like opium. I mean, opium was a medical drug for many, many years, and heroin itself was developed as a pain relieving drug. It's still, diamorphine, which is really pure heroin, is still used in medical settings, or variants of it. People will. Probably everybody will know somebody that's been treated with morphine at some point in hospital. So of course, these are legitimate, but it's when they hit the streets. See, like the composition of how people take drugs is changing anyway over the last decade. I mean, there used to be a quite distinct barrier between heroin and cocaine, and it was really one or the other, or ecstasy or whatever. But in the last 10 years, they've seen an absolute rise as well. If you talk about crack cocaine addiction, the other addiction that has risen is the abuse of prescription medications. benzodiazepines and various types. So people have become used to being, as you described them, polyusers, where once heroin addicts bought heroin and that's it. These range of different prescription medications are also being used by people that are in the height of that addiction. That has opened, I suppose, the market up to these newer products, these newer substitutes. And it is very dangerous. And in America, it's become a big political issue just because of the visible destruction that can be seen in some inner cities in the US.
But a lot of people would say it's become a big political issue because a lot of those that are dying are middle-class educated students from middle-class families. And they are taking it. It's because it has made its way now into sort of the cocaine, because they're cutting cocaine with it. Because at the end of the day, the drug dealers, they're buying a bar of heroin or, a few hundred grams of coke.
Yeah.
If they can cut that and make it more powerful, more potent and sell more of it, they will. They don't give a shit what they're putting into it.
No.
So you get some fentanyl and you stick it into that, and all of a sudden you've got a product that's stronger, that goes further, that you can cut it with talcum powder or whatever you're putting into it to make it. You're trebling your money, your profits, and that's what they're all about.
Well, yeah, I mean, they're not. If you're a particularly moral person, you're probably not in the heroin trade anyway.
Exactly.
I mean, alongside all of this, we have the government debate on drugs. Liberalisation. We have other issues arising to do with centres where people could take drugs, within city centres, injection clinics, basically, that would be supervised and monitor for health problems. So we have all of this big debate. Into the mix comes this very lethal, potent substance. And it's not clear what's going to happen. We also have then the other side, which is a growing lobby against the open use of drugs in the city centre. So that has also become a very political issue in the US for the Republican Party are really, focusing in on that. So it's going to be a really difficult situation, how we're going to manage all of this.
I think the kind of really what is going on in Afghanistan is going to be the big test really of fentanyl and its entry into Europe, whether it becomes, and really that's going to happen. It was, I think, last year in April that the Taliban decided they were imposing a crackdown on the poppy production, basically, and cultivation in Afghanistan. So by April coming, we'll be 12 months into that. And then within the next 6 months. So by the end of this year, moving into 2025, if there is that heroin drought, that's really when, I suppose, opportunists within the drug market will be sort of gearing up and maybe testing the system. Now, there was reports before Christmas that some tablets that had got into the prison service were going to be tested for fentanyl because there had been this sort of unprecedented amount of overdoses within the prison system. We haven't heard what the results of those testings were, whether that was pure fentanyl or whether it was one of these other substances we're talking about also made in factories. But all the signs are there, really, aren't they?
They're all there, and there have been droughts before on the heroin market due to geopolitical issues, and they're all universally predicting this is the case. As I said, Afghanistan produces, it is estimated, 90% of the world's supply, so it's unlikely to be taken up by some other criminal gangs. Sometimes if there's been crackdowns on cocaine in Colombia, you'll see a rise in countries around it, like Bolivia or other countries that can produce it. But it just doesn't seem to be anywhere else. The reality is the drop of the availability of heroin won't cure people of addiction, unfortunately. So it will go to other sources. So it's a deep concern, and the nitrazine overdoses, I think, point the way of what could really happen. They were managed really well, I think. There seemed to have been a very quick response. It seems to be that the alerts and the messages were able to get out amongst that community, and people did respond to them. But 57 non-fatal overdoses. I mean, there is an element to look that people didn't die there. You have to be say that.
If you consider the pressure that would have put on the A&E services, the hospital services, you're looking at a huge amount of people needing.
Yeah.
I mean, what happens in an overdose? I think what's been described in the fentanyl overdose is the minute it hits the system, it's gone. You're just knocked out, blue.
Yeah.
And really, you need medical attention.
Yeah, I mean, I think it can lead to organ failure very quickly. It can collapse.
But when somebody has a non-fatal overdose, are they kept in hospital system for a long time, or?
Well, I mean, I don't know, but there is this obviously anti-overdose drug that has been made available as well. Naloxone, is it? Yeah. So, I mean, I think that kind of restarts the heart, basically.
And that has been used and is like part and parcel of the ambulance services in the States. They have loads of that because so many call-outs are for that reason. And you've seen stuff, I'm sure, on the telly when they arrive and they just inject that.
Yeah.
And it brings people back to life. It's quite an extraordinary drug, actually. You know what I mean?
I mean, I think you saw it. Is it the same drug that was in Pulp Fiction famously, if you remember that scene where they kind of...
When John Travolta character was dancing with Mrs. Mia Wallace.
Brings her back. I actually don't think that's the exact drug, but it's an idea like that. Yeah. People have seen that film. So there's another debate about how it is available, obviously, in Dublin, but to make it more available and, make people be able to access it quickly and easily. It's very hard to see why it wouldn't be,
Yeah. Okay. Well, look, I'm no doubt we'll come back to this issue over the coming months. Thank you, Niall.
Thanks, Nicola.
I'm Nicola Tallant and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.